Recording in progress. So let's do the second half. We went over, just kind of do a quick recap. For the first part, we did go over creating the opacity map to cut the shape of the wine label out for the wine bottle. We talked about using projection maps. We went over basically how to create a projection map. You have to right click on the file node to create as projection. So it'll take your 2D, put it into a 3D projection, which will allow you to move it in X, Y, Z. Remember, if you forget, you're stuck texture mapping, that's UV space. You don't really have a whole lot of control over it. Not as much as you do with projections. When you're working with projections, you're probably going to be layering in Maya. Now, you don't have to use Maya's layer texture just for projection. You can layer regular textures on top of it. It's just that it's nice when they're movable and you can shift them around to change, location to where it suits the composition or you. Don't forget, Maya's layering system is horizontal rather than vertical. We talked about common blend modes. The two most common ones you're going to use are add and multiply. If you have a black background, you want to get rid of the black, keep whatever your decal is, that's going to be add. If you've got a white background and you want to get rid of the white, but keep your decal, that's going to be multiply. If it gives you the opposite result, you reverse it. All right, so let's take that concept into a couple of our scenes. So, let me fire up Maya. We'll go into the Zen garden first, do a projection on the table, which is really probably one of the easier places to do it in the scene. You can do projections later on, as you'll find out on Monday, in Substance, if you haven't already done them in another class. But in our class, we must have at least one Maya projection as well. All right, there we go. Let's set project. Open up lecture 9. Now, I kind of like this because I've already got a texture on the table. All right, here we go. So for the exterior, the table makes a really good target because it's so big. Wherever you put it, let's go to the render cam or the close-up shot. Just make sure it is visible. If you're doing the night scene, you're going to have candles, so you're going to have to kind of place it somewhere. Don't bury the candles on top of it. A little more real estate in the daytime, but nighttime still works. All right, so it happens that I already have a texture on here, which usually happens a lot. You're working on something, your boss comes in and goes, great, they want to put some graffiti or they want to put a decal on that table. And you've already got the texture on there. So what could you do? Well, first, you could start over and just assign a new material to it. You could remove your texture, put a layer texture on there, place your texture into a layer and do that. Or you can kind of go into the hypershade and use what you've already got and kind of slip that layer texture into the chain that you have, which is what I'm going to show you, because usually that's where you're at with it. All right, where's my table? Right there. So let's graph it. It's a very simple network. What I want to do is stick a layered texture in between my file node and my material. Now, in some 3D packages, you can create a node, drag it into the stream, and it will automatically connect itself. Those are other packages, not Maya. I mean, it would be nice if it did that, but quite frankly, there are so many connections in Maya, it would have to read your mind in order to be able to put it in the right place. And until we get the neural net interface, that's not going to happen. And would you really want to be hooked up to Maya? No, because you'd crash whenever Maya did. So first off, we want to create a layered texture. Where do we find it? Other textures. Yep. Basically under a rock. Other textures. Now, if I inside the hypershade, if I click on any one of these nodes, it's going to create it, but not attach it to anything. When you're inside your Maya tech or your Arnold material and you click the input button, it's automatically going to attach it to that part of the material. When you're in the hypershade, everything is freeform. So I click on other textures, click on layered textures. I get a layered texture that is not attached to anything. Now, my layered texture by default has only one layer. That's totally fine. What I want to do is put this wood texture into that one layer. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And what I need to do is expand my inputs for the layered texture. Just click the little plus button. There's input 0. Remember, in Maya, the first number is always 0. It's basic coding. In coding, 0 is a valid number just like any other number. So input 0, you have to expand input 0, and there are your options. So I want to take the out color, plug it into color here. Now, that's all fine and well, but the problem is this layer texture is not attached to the material yet. So it's easy. All you have to do is go out color from the layer texture to the base color, your input. And now it looks like nothing happened. If that's the way it looks, good job, you're successful. You've basically just plugged your texture into the only layer that's in your layer texture. But that's not good enough for us because we want to put another layer and put our graffiti or our projection on that layer. So how do we make a new layer? What's that? Where? Oh, okay, right down here. So down under the layer texture attributes, just click once. If you sneeze and click multiple times, you'll have to get rid of them. Now, is that the right order? So what do we need to do? Yeah, we can stop. We can middle mouse click the green in front of the blue behind the green, doesn't matter. Middle mouse, click, drag. There we go. So now we have this lovely green texture. Now, this is where the work comes in. So we've got an empty layer. What do we do to that empty layer? That's where we want our detail. Well, base color is taken up with the layer texture. Right. So just make sure you're in the proper layer too, because the more layers you have, it's really essential that you click on the layer and make sure you adjust the attributes for that layer. Because it's real easy to be on here and then realize you're trying to adjust something for another layer. So this is where we go to color. We click the input button, brings up our create render node. Now what do we do? Right. So 2D textures, you want to right click instead of left click. So right click, create as projection. So now here is our happy little network down here. So now we've got our base, which has the wood texture for the table. On top of that, we've got a projection node with no file in it yet, but we've got the start of it. So we want to go to the file node right here. And this is where we're going to plug in our SAL logo. Now, just like when I did the demo, it's going to drop that projector where? Center of the world, center of your scene. So in order to find that, you just kind of hunt around. And usually there's my origin. When in doubt, you can always just go wireframe and find out, oh, there's the center of the grid. So let's bring that up. It looks like an area light. It's got a pointer like an area light, but that little diamond in the lower left corner says I'm a projection. So what I need to do is I want this projector to aim at my geometry. Because right now, it's really just breezing right across the tabletop. So let me pull it up a little bit. Let's rotate it. Remember, I want that pointer aimed at the geometry. So I got to rotate it. Looks like it's going in X. So let's go 90 degrees. There we are. It's a little on the big side. Don't worry about that. We can scale it. All you have to do is just activate the scale tool. Drop it in there. Let me see if I can get it on a board. Smaller. Now I could go across a couple of boards, but it's going to look like it's kind of melting in between them. Still could be a little smaller. Right, like right here for now, that'll be fine. All right, so we got it in there, but it looks like a contact sheet rather than it does a single decal or a single piece of graffiti. So now we got to solve a couple problems. First one is multiple decals. How do we get rid of extras besides scissors? All right, so whatever your file node is, whatever number it happens to be, or how you keep track of it, there's always, whenever you have a file node, there's always going to be a place 2D attached to it that gives it some transform information in UV space. We want to go under the place 2D that's attached to it, and there's where you'll find wrap U and wrap V. Turn them off. Now we're down to a single decal. All right, so almost there. Another problem is we know we need to use a blend mode in order for this top layer to allow the bottom layer to show through. So let's go blend mode. Let's go back to the layer texture. What blend mode do we want to use? First off, what color is the background of our decal? White. So what kind of blend mode do we want to use to get rid of white, keep the black? So it would be multiply. So you select your top layer, go to blend mode, go to multiply. Honestly, if you forget and go add, what it will do is get rid of the black and just keep everything but black. Now, we have the swatch. That looks like it's correct, but all around the rest of the wood is too dark. Part of that is coming from, before we use the blend mode, all this gray. We want this gray to match the same color as the background of our logo, which is white. Anybody remember where we go to fix that? So when I use multiply, that is correct, but that is too dark. Okay, so file node itself. So we go to file, and then where do we go? So you want to go to color balance. Color balance got a bunch of other things. What we're interested in is default color. Now, by default, it's always going to be 50% gray, just so there's something to display. What you want to do is make it the same color as your background. So that means changing the default color to white. So now the whole tabletop is white with the black decal. We want to go back to our layer texture. Let's put back on multiply. And now we've got our projection. We can move it around, we can rotate it, we can scale it. And let me get rid of this. Really don't need the denoiser on there. There we go. Oh yeah, and I did crank up my render settings. Let's not do that. Not yet anyway. Okay, there we go. Right, now, a couple things you can do to kind of help this. And one is, notice that this completely covers the wood. In reality, if this were a real decal done with ink or paint or marker or pencil or whatever, there would be a little bit of that wood bleeding through. So how can we fix that? Say again? I say again? Alpha. Okay. Where? Okay, so layers, top layer. Yep, that's exactly what we want to do. Think of alpha as, in Maya, an opacity. So what we can do is we can kind of ghost this layer a little bit, so we allow some of the wood grain to start showing through. How much? Well, that depends on your reference and your personal preference. It always looks a little better when you've got a little bit of the texture underneath kind of bleeding through. Now you could put it on the other side. It doesn't really matter, wherever you want to put it. You could put it on top of the, well, I wouldn't advise the bread because then nobody's going to eat the bread. But you could put it on the cutting board. But generally, I mean, the cutting board makes a perfect target for substance because you can make it wood. You can add a lot of wear and tear, cuts and stains and discoloration to it in substance. All right, does that kind of make sense? The workflow for this? Questions? Anybody? So this same process can be used on the interior. Now on the interior, for the close-up, you've got the table and you've also got a wall. Walls are perfect, especially kid height. Kid or pet height, scratches. Depending on how big your pet is, yeah, even the edge of the table, chew marks. Now, one thing I do want to show you is how to do the projection on that stainless steel brushed metal thermal container we got on the desk. So let me set project here, interior. Let's go file, open, here we are. I copied the one that we did in lecture 7 over. Yeah, I know. You're not happy. Yeah, weird question. Go ahead. So for the daytime, yes. Nighttime, it's a light and it's not a material. If you do it on a light, you've got to put it as a kind of a decal into the color in the light. It sort of works okay. But you wouldn't do it as a projection. You would actually do it with UVs. But yes, you can definitely do it for this. If, like I said, for the day. The trouble with also, if you throw a texture into the light itself and use it, it's going to knock down the amount of light that it emits. So it's going to change your lighting. The only thing you could do is try to, what you'd probably have to do is make it, instead of making the screen itself a mesh light, put your texture in there. You'd have to make it super bright so it looked like it was emitting light. And then you'd have to probably put an area light in front of it that's not visible to the camera to throw some extra light back into the scene. You know what I mean? Because as soon as you start adding anything into a mesh light, it's immediately going to cut down on the illumination because you're putting something in there to basically block light. So yeah, it is possible to do it. It's going to take a little more work. That would be, if you're done everything else and you want to play around, that would be a good thing to play with. In fact, write down these ideas, but get all the requirements first and then, go on like a, experimentation rampage. Just make sure you got a good copy and make copies of your work and don't work on your turn-in files. That way, if anything goes horribly wrong and turns into Frankenstein, the monster won't kill you. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. I mean, that's how you learn, is playing around with this stuff. What works, what doesn't work, what can you break? Okay, if I broke it, how do I fix it? Oh, I can't fix it, I got to go back. So, and also worst comes to worst is you can always just, if that object goes south, for whatever reason, the geometry gets hosed, the texture gets hosed, the light gets hosed in it, you can always import it from an older version in by itself, especially if you've done a lot of work in the scene. So there's always fixes and outs for it, but always leave yourself a breadcrumb trail, like multiple copies. Yep. Good question. All right. So how far did we get here? I don't remember. I'm pretty sure we did the Klein bottle, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, I did. I threw that on the table. Okay, so this would be good. Actually, I could do it on the table. And I'll show you the thermos also. So let me find my reference for the table. And that is, where are we? Over here. Lecture 8 reference? No. Interior reference. Here it is. So I need to find a wood texture sort of like that so I can throw it on. That's my reference. I already got the material properties of it, but I want to add my texture on there. So fortunately, I did find such a texture, but I don't remember what it's called. Here we go. That's what I used. All right, so for the table, already got my material. Going to click on the checker button. And for this, since this is going to be a base, I don't want to project this texture onto the table. This is going to sit on as UVs. So left click on file. And that's not it. Birch? No, that's not it. Interior. There it is. All right, so if I bring it in there, let's see how it lays out. All right, where's my reference at? All right, so the wood texture on my reference is actually pretty big. The scale that my UVs are at sort of work pretty good. I could always scale my UVs up if I had to, break it up into smaller pieces, put it in different locations, but it matches my reference pretty good. So this is one case where my material, since I set it up properly, when I put my texture in, it matches my reference pretty good. Except, why is it taking forever to render? Oh, yeah, that's why. Because I have it cranked up because we were looking at glass. Now, if I find this is responding to too much light, what can I do? Just like I did with the exterior. Bring what? Yes, I can bring my base weight down a little bit. And remember, it's the base weight that is allowing the material to respond to the light. So this one doesn't look too bad. I mean, I'm looking at my reference in the areas where it's really close to the window. I'm sort of getting that same look. So looks like it works pretty good. Scale is pretty good. Like I said, I set the material property up with just color before. So now that I have it on here, I'm looking at it going, okay, that's not bad. Computer desk, that's all the way up. The roughness level, yeah, that should work. Now, if I wanted to, I could turn this into a layered texture, put a projection on the table. I could project it from the front. I could project it from the top, from the side, wherever I want to go. And the nice thing about using a projection is it doesn't matter where your UVs are because it's using 3D space. If your UVs are laid out correctly and it displays properly on your object, you're just pointing it at the area you want it to illuminate. So we could do it from the front, from the side, from the top. Could also do it on the wall back here. Right there. This wall off in the front, that's a separate piece of geometry. All right, let's do the thermos. I don't think I have, no, it's not a separate material. Thermos, brushed metal. And this little tiny plastic ring. Don't forget, this is the reference we gave you guys. So that's going to be this. Plastic ring, stainless steel, top and bottom. All right, we're going to set this up as metal. So in order for me to do that, first thing I have to do is turn up metalness all the way. Let's just focus in on that area. So I turn metalness up all the way. I've got default roughness. The weight stays. For the specular weight stays at 1. The color stays white because it's gray metal, white metal. I just need to find out the reflectance information. Where's a good place to go for reflectance information? Specular. Well, how can I find out reflectance information though? What I need is, if I'm making stainless steel, how bright should it be? And what color should it be, or value should it be? That's a possibility, but if you're trying to make the actual metallic object, I'm going back to project 6 to the refractive index website. That'll give me my 0 degree, which is base color value, and it'll give me my 90 degree, which is my specular color value. Generally for metal, most metals are highly reflective on the edges, that specular part. So they're usually white, but it's the gray part that we see that really makes the difference. All right, so this is where I want to go. Now I want to find out, first off, what would be the proper information for stainless steel. Well, honestly, that's one thing they don't have on this website, but stainless steel is very similar to titanium. Sounds kind of weird, but they have the same refractive extinction coefficient, or basically the same reflectance information. So this is going to be my 0 degree, or my base color value, 0.598. So that's going to be right here, 0.598. Little darker. And what is my 90 degrees? So I just have to plug in 90. It's going to be at 1, which is exactly what my specular is. So that's good to go. Now I need to make this brushed metal. So brushed metal is anisotropic. So let's make it anisotropic. Go like 0.9. Couldn't go higher, 0.95. I don't like to go to 1 because, like I said, when you start using the denoiser, it starts to get a little weird. But now, that's all fine and well, but it's stretching my highlight the wrong way. I need it to stretch vertically. So that means by default, I'm going to have to rotate this 90 degrees. But I don't have degrees. I only have 0 to 1. So what do I have to do? What's the 0 to 1 equivalent of 90 degrees? Yeah, 0.25. It's going to be a quarter. So 0.25. Now I got a nice stretch. I need a little more roughness. That's pretty rough, pretty blurry. Just like this. Now, if I wanted to make this kind of bluish, I could plug hue into my base color and my specular. Plug a little bit in there to get this. But I'm just using this silver one. All right, so let's crank up the roughness. All right, so I did that. There's my metal, or actually my plastic ring. So that's going to be pretty dark plastic. And it's going to be, you can see it's kind of worn. It's sort of similar to this top part of my bottle up here. So knock that down. Let's increase the roughness also. All right, now. So this one has, my bottle here has a white logo on it. The reference here has a black logo. So we provide you with this AAA black logo. That's going to go in here. All right, going to go to perspective. There we go. All right. Now, in order for me to be able to put a decal on this metal bottle, I need to use a layer texture. And you say, but it's just a solid metal color for the base. It doesn't matter. I still need that solid metal value there for the decal to sit on top of. All right, so my value is 0.598. Now I could go in, well, it wouldn't make sense for me to go in to the hypershade because there really is no network there. It's a solid color. So honestly, it's a lot easier for me just to go base, click on that. Let's go to other color. Let's add a layered texture in. All right, so in there, this is where I'm going to put in my value of 0.598. So now if I render this piece out, it shouldn't look any different than it did before. And it doesn't. So now I've got a layered texture that I can now apply a projection onto. Even though it's just a solid color. I could do the same thing with the wall. The wall's a solid color. I need to make that single layer in the layer texture, make it the same color as your wall. All right, now, I want to make a projection. What do I need to do here? So I got my base color in there. It looks the same as it did. Yeah, got to add a new layer. There we go. All right, so I need to make that new layer the top layer. Go to color. Just click on file. Ah, there we go. The key is right click. If you forget, just Z back, come in, do it again. Projection. There we go. So now this is where we are going to throw in our AAA logo, which we provide as part of the download. I downloaded it earlier. Here it is. Let's click open. And you can see I have multiple versions of it all over. Now, the downside of doing this on metal is you're not going to see it in the viewport like I could with the table and, you know, anything else I did in Maya. Metal just is not visible until you render it. So what you need to do is have it on a pretty low resolution, quick IPR so you can move stuff around and get feedback. But there's one big issue with a projection. That is, where is my projector? It's like, where's Waldo? Waldo's at the center of the world. My projector is somewhere here. There it is. Right there. Not going to move it, but it needs to be over here because it's got to aim and point itself at the geometry. All right, so a couple of ways I could do this. I could manually translate it all the way over there, right? Rotate it, put it in position. Another way, which works sometimes and doesn't other times because it's Maya, if I select that projector in the viewport, it takes me to my place 3D texture attributes. And there's this button down here under placement attributes called fit to group B-box. Now, I don't know if we've talked about bounding boxes, but you guys should know what bounding boxes are from modeling. If not from modding a game or something. I mean, a bounding box is basically a way you describe where an object sits in 3D space. You define it with primitive points. So any object can be defined by 8 points. Basically, a small invisible box around this shape. Or even around something that is, you know, soft. If you took my backpack and made a bounding box, it would be a bounding box that basically allowed this whole thing to sit in. And it's a really quick way to describe position in 3D space. Don't forget bounding boxes. We also use, we used them in gaming originally for collision boxes also, so that your character wouldn't walk through a wall. But in early games, you know, characters sometimes would have an elbow go into the wall because it went outside the bounding box. But the idea behind this is, if I click this fit to group B-box button, it should force this projection to snap to the geometry. And it did it. Now, as long as you don't move that projection, so here's what happens if I move the projection. And I click that. Oh, it still worked. Okay. Last month, it didn't work. Last month, it made a big stupid box in my room, and that was it. So I swear every other month it works. All right, so these are good times. Maya has smiled upon me. So let me fit this. So here's what happened. It took that projector, snapped it to the geometry, and now I can kind of move it around. So what I want to do is kind of resize this, because honestly, that's way big than I want. So these are interactive placement handles, which means I can move these, I can scale these. And you can see it catches up. It doesn't look too bad. But the problem is it's kind of reversed because it's coming from the other side. I really want this to be aimed here. So interactive placement, if I click the little diamond down here in the corner, and then I click the circle, I can just go in and rotate this around. There we go. That's a little better. So I rotated it. Let's go back to scale. Now, if you want to like resize it proportionally, just grab one of the tops. All right, so it should be roughly that size, center of the bottle, but we got a couple things going on here. One is we have multiple versions of this logo. So how do we get rid of those? Hang on a second. Let me graph the network and we can see. So it's got a base color, but what we're interested in is the file node. Because remember, it's the actual projection, the file node in the projection that carries this repeating information. So here's our network. Here's our projection. There's the file. There's the placement node. We want to turn off wrap U and wrap V. Now, when we do that, we're still left with this issue where we've got kind of a grayer version of our thermos all around the logo. The logo area is correct. Well, actually, no, it's not. What we need to do is actually, we still need to get rid of the white background and allow this to show through. So what do we want to use? All right, so we want the whole background to be the same color as our logo. So there's file, color balance. We want to make it white. So now it's all white, but it's way too bright. We need it to have this 0.598. So we need to use a blend mode. We basically want to get rid of the white, keep the black. So what do we need to use? Yeah, blend mode, multiply. So now it's got our slightly darker gray brushed metal, and we have our logo. Now for this, I probably want to crank up the render settings so I can see what's going on. It's going to take a little bit longer, but I should be able to get a better idea of how it looks. There we go. Fairly similar to what we have here. It might be a little high. Well, in that case, that's pretty simple. Just translate it down. So it sits more in the middle. All right, so even though it's metal, it's really not much different than any other surface that has a texture on it. It's just got a solid color, that's all. We could do the same thing if we had a solid color on the wall. The wall could be green, the wall could be blue. You want to put a decal on it, you still need to have that blue or green background for the wall. And then the decal sits on top. It's still a layered texture. Does that make sense? Same thing with the table. Put a decal on that also. Questions? Oh, we get 2 in one day. Wow, that's because Maya worked. So it's not going to let us have like a nice day. There we go. Okay. So it seems like every 2 hours it shows up, no matter what we do. All right, anybody have questions? Zoom, Kenny, Carl, Ashley, questions?
Nope, I'm all good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Carl's good, thank you. Ashley's good. Anybody here have questions? All right, so you need a projection. You can do one, do the basic requirement, and then if you want to throw more in there, feel free. Go crazy if you want to. Put little nicks and dents and dings and scratches all over the place. But just get the main requirements first. Don't forget, you can also find old textures too, like old scratched wood as a texture already done. Now, for that, you might need to generate a bump map to be able to get the scratches part, but it's still doable. All right, so one more thing I do want to go over is utilizing what's called the remap HSV file node. Close all this. And let's use our chair here as a guinea pig. All right, so there's our chair, nice IKEA chair. And let's stick a Arnold. Arnold material on it. I don't even need to, well, I will render it eventually, but I really don't need to render it out to be able to see a texture for this. Now, a lot of times, whenever you get a texture off the internet that has one of the primary colors like reds or greens or blues, a lot of times with file compression, those colors become exaggerated over time because information's thrown away. It's redone based on a few pixels. So over time, those colors tend to become very saturated and artificial looking. So a lot of times you'll get reds, you'll get greens, you'll get blues that are really vibrant. And in order for them to work in your environment, you kind of need to knock down the saturation value of it. You could do that in Photoshop, or you can do it in Maya. All right, so in Maya, well, let's throw a texture on. So I think I have something that will fit that for us. Interior. I do believe, yeah, nice tablecloth, nice red tablecloth texture. Everybody always wants to put that on a chair. So let's just throw that on. There we go. So JPEG, pretty saturated. If that were really in an environment like this, sitting in front of a window with the UV light and the sun, that would fade probably in a couple of weeks or a month or so, start to fade. And for one thing, it's really dominant and perfect looking. So there's a couple of things we can do. One is I could take it into Photoshop, go in and desaturate it, bring it back into Maya and see how it looks. If I don't like it, I got to go back into Photoshop and fix it. Or I can try using Maya's remap HSV node, which will allow me to remap the color, the saturation, and the value. Sounds like voodoo, but it's not. So let's go into the hypershade. And computer desk chair cushion. Here we go. So here it is. So honestly, the remap HSV is really, really simple. I know I say that about a lot of stuff, and then it turns out blowing everybody's minds. But it's got an input and it's got an output. That's all it has. So what we do, no, wrong place. There we are. So this is a Maya utility. So all Maya utilities are alphabetical. So if I click on utilities, I go down to R, which is where remap is. And you'll see there's remap color, remap HSV, remap value. We want HSV because it gives us separate controls. I don't want to remap the color at all. I want to adjust the saturation of the file. So I click on remap HSV. It's got an input on the left and an output on the right. That's it. No tricks, nothing up my sleeve. So here, tablecloth, we take the out color, drag it into the left side of the remap to color, take the out color on the right side of the remap and pop that into base. What it does is it breaks that file into three separate things: color, saturation, value. So now under saturation and basically it's a line bar, a line graph. 0 all the way down on the left, 1 all the way on the right. 1 means it's got total saturation. Whatever the file has to offer, it's being put in. If I want to take some of that vibrance of the red out, all I have to do is drop the right side down and it starts to drop down in saturation. So sometimes just dropping it down a little, like 0.95 or 0.9 is just enough to take the edge off of it so it looks decent. Does that make sense? So instead of going back and forth into Photoshop or some other image editing program, try it in Maya, and in this way you can adjust it right away, immediately. Now, one thing that's kind of dangerous with this is you can also change the color. So your boss comes in and goes, yeah, I know the customer gave us that red color, but they want to see what would that look like purple. So if you've got this in there, you can simply adjust your color. Let's say, oh, you want to see purple? There you go. Oh, how about green? Let's go orange. So it uses, you know, that color slider in your color picker where it goes like 0 to 360 or whatever. It's like a full circle of color or a full slider of color. It's the same thing. It starts and ends on red. On the left side, it goes through reds and oranges and yellows and greens and blues and purples back to red. Same thing here. Now, honestly, if you were going to make this permanent, you'd probably be better off finding an actual photo of the color you want. This is good for proof of concept. Now, like I said, in some circumstances, you might be able to get away with it. But honestly, if you were going to do this as a permanent thing, I would go into Photoshop and do it because Photoshop is going to be a little more accurate as far as color goes. What's that? Exactly. Saturation, you're just taking the edge off of it. And whether you do it in Photoshop or Maya, that's not going to matter. But color accuracy, depending on what you need it for. Like if you're doing like an 8K video or a game where the color's got to be perfect, this is not the place to do it. And honestly, I don't even think Unreal would be the place to do it. You'd want to do it in a native file. And you'd want to make it an HDR or an EXR, some kind of high dynamic range file. And you need a program that can handle it. But like I said, proof of concept, you're just trying to get approval. Perfect. Quick down, well, production, the whole philosophy is down and dirty and then fix it later. Down and dirty, get it approved, then go back and go, holy crap, how are we gonna actually do that? You know, the whole thing's held together with baling wire and chewing gum and duct tape. But then you take it in the back and, you know, it's like going into a hot dog factory. You find out what's in the hot dogs and then you try and make them edible. Stupid analogy, but sorry. All right. Does that kind of make sense though? So this will save you quite a bit of time. So if you're getting feedback from us, you know, and you're going and we go, you know, everything's looking good. The red pillows though, they're really too saturated. You really got to knock them down. This is the way to do it. Go in, throw a remap HSV on it, and then you can take it and run with it. Questions? All right. I'm going to call it right here because I mean, I could keep going forever. I'm going to stop here. Tony Bagsby will do Monday Substance Painter with you. And then on Wednesday, to wrap up class, I'm going to show you guys displacements in Maya, which are not required, but something I think you should know about. And also, believe it or not, Maya's procedurals. Because with Maya's procedurals, we can do some real trickery that most people aren't aware of. You know, it's got procedurals. They're not as elegant as Substance by any measure, but they can still do some real interesting things. And I'll show you some of these procedurals with the displacement map. I don't want to throw procedurals in here now because we're not requiring them. We'd rather have you do them in Substance. But I'm going to show you old school. In the before times, before Substance. All right, so let's treat this like a lab until 5, and then you guys can go to lunch. If you have any issues or you need help with anything, let me know. Just work. And I will stop the video. But first, before I do that, Kenny, Carl, Ashley, any questions?
Nope, I'm all good still.
Okay, Carl's good. Ashley's good. All right, let me stop the video.